And this is where the archaeology proper begins. And here I'd like to focus on some of the key words. The country now called Hellas had in ancient times no settled population. On the contrary, migrations were of frequent occurrence, the several tribes readily abandoning their homes under the pressure of superior numbers. So in other words, long ago, he doesn't say when long ago was. I don't think it was that long ago, but he said they didn't have any cities and they migrated a lot because a greater population overwhelmed them, right? Without commerce, without freedom of communication either by land or sea, cultivating no more of their territory than the exigencies of life required, destitute of capital, never planting their land, for they could not tell when an invader might not come and take it all away. When he did come, they had no walls to stop it. Thinking that the necessities of daily sustenance could be supplied at one place as well as another, they cared little for shifting their habitation, and consequently neither built large cities nor attained to any other form of greatness. This is long ago in Greece. And this is, as Rami has said, what he's imagining here is take everything we think of as civilization and say not. They didn't have it. They didn't have it. And that's why he has come up with this bleak picture, which probably inspired Hobbes' famous characterization of early human life, because Hobbes was a translator of Thucydides, nasty, brutish, and short. Remember, he talked about human lives in a passage that recalls this to some extent. So the earliest Greeks were really miserable. But by the way, it's very easy to think that he's talking about hunter-gatherers in, pre-Stone Age societies. It's not that. He says they could plant. They didn't plant their land, but or cultivating no more of their territory than the exigencies required. In other words, they had agriculture. They just didn't use it because somebody would invade them and take away all their crops. So looking at all the words, looking at all the concepts here, you can see oikos, meaning to make a city or make a home, oikidzo, nemo, which means to inhabit or to feed off of land in the active or the middle. And then these other words are going to come in later. The tropos, which means a way of life, dieta, which is also a way of life, which is where we get diet from, epitedeo, which is another word for a way of life, to do on a daily basis. And then you have mainland and sea here. And these are all concepts that he either brings up here or brings up in the following sections. Readers of the Archaeology, once we read the whole thing, we'll see that what he's trying to describe is the failure to know the formula. Seafaring plus commerce plus surplus plus walls plus unity plus empire equals greatness. Those are the ingredients. And if you don't have all of those ingredients, you will not amount to anything. And obviously, if you jump ahead and think, wait a minute, just which city had all of these things? Obviously, it's Athens, right? Athens. He's working backwards from Athens. And so people have pointed out one person's historical reconstruction and analysis of early societies is another person's anachronism, right? So you can say the archaeology is great because he looks at the past in timeless terms and analyzes its failures and successes. Another person will say, nope, he's just a presentist. He can't imagine anything other than what's happening in his own day. And he simply is limited by that. So you have to deal with both possibilities. So how is he going to analyze the past? Preceding mobilizations, including those of the more distant past, although impossible to determine clearly after so much time, were probably not important as war, either in wars or anything else. So you have to look at the past, you have to determine it clearly, and you have to see if it was important. And there are a lot of key words here like that. Palaios, there are two words for past in Thucydides. Palaios is the word for simple just past, in other words, in terms of time. Archaios, which comes from arche first, means quantitatively different. Archaios he doesn't use. Archaios means original. So archaeology is the wrong word for this, by the way. It should be paleontology, but an archaeologist's term for their discipline is also the wrong word in Thucydidean terms, because it implies, archaeology should be studying things that are qualitatively different from now, the origins, and it should be studying dinosaurs, while paleontology should be studying things that are just human but past. But it's been reversed. But in Thucydides, palaios means the old things. And tekmerion means a clue. Tekmerion means something that you use to deduce something that you don't know. A clue, it can also mean the deduction that follows from that clue. Skopeo means to look at something not only visually, but intellectually, to study it. And heurisko means to make a discovery based on that. Histeo means to have trust or have faith in your discovery. And nomidzo means to hold an opinion about something. It's not a fact, but it's an opinion. But it's based on all of these preceding verbs. And all of these are the words that mark the archaeology off as a series of rational deductions about the past that lead to firm conclusions, beliefs on Thucydides' part about what makes human progress. And the major characteristic of this section is that it's a frame. The beginning of the archaeology uses the same words again at the end of the so-called, it's called the archaeology, we're stuck with that title. I would call it the tekmerion, the clues, because that's what he's doing. He's using clues in this section to come up with deductions. But the beginning of this section, the archaeology, uses the same words to frame in ring composition the end. That's a device that's very well known from Homer and poetry, but it's not a poetic, it's not an archaic device. It's a common memory device that people use in all times and places, especially when they want to mark the beginning and end of a section before they move on to the other. And Thucydides is such a scatterbrained thinker in the archaeology that if it weren't for ring composition, we would never be able to figure out what his subjects are. As you'll see this as you read him, scatterbrained in the sense of he's always flipping from one topic to another. He said, this reminds me of this, reminds me of this, reminds me of this. And so he has to keep himself in check by having these 7 ring compositions, 7 places where the beginning of a section makes the same statement that the end of the section makes, using the same words. You have to use the same words in Greek. I've given you the English, but it has to be the same words in Greek. It's not fair to change the English words like some people do and fabricate your own ring compositions. You have to use the Greek words. So these are the 7 topics that the archaeology is about. And they're not the topics you would think, but they contain all sorts of other topics within them, which are brought back into organizational discipline by the beginning and the end of the ring. So first of all, there was no common Greek action before the Trojan War. And you'll find that 3.1 and 3.4 use the same words there. That's one. Seafaring had been developed by the time of the Trojan War. 3.4 repeated in 8.4. Agamemnon compelled his alliance. In other words, Agamemnon did not rule people voluntarily. They were afraid of him, the Greeks who went to Troy. And he had naval power. That's 9.1 to 9.3, a very short one. And even this enterprise lacked money. Even the Trojan War, big as it was, did not have enough money. And that's 9.4 and 11.1. Then after the Trojan War, Greece remained unstable. Another ring there. Even though there was extensive building of navies, again, a ring, and there were obstacles to Greek growth, right? These are not compelling statements. They're actually not statements you remember easily, but they are the ones that contain his thoughts. And you will find if you don't keep these rings in mind, you will wonder, how did he get on this subject? He starts out talking about seafaring at the time of the Trojan War, and he ends up talking about whether they wore diapers or nude to compete in the Olympics, and whether they had golden hairbands, golden hairpins in the shape of cicadas in Athens. What's that got to do with anything? And it doesn't. It's a deduction from a deduction from a deduction. And by the way, one of his favorite sources of information here is, paradoxically, two cities that were completely unimportant during this period, Athens and Sparta, because those are the two cities he knows. So he will say, this principle, by the way, is well illustrated by Athens and Sparta, even though it's not in the period he's talking about. So, I mean, it's easier to make fun of this section than it is to appreciate it in some ways. On the other hand, in this section, as you'll see, he really uses a lot of different methods, you might say. Well, first of all, he's got these great terms for keywords. Ptaomai, to acquire, kremata, money, plutos, wealth, paraskewe is preparedness, and then power and conflict. The wall, tekos, dunamis, power, krateo, mastery, archo, being first, in other words, either beginning or ruling, hupekoos, subjects, hegeomai, be the leader, bebaios and asphales, both meaning security, impregnability. Those are the words that come up in the rest of the archaeology. Oh yeah, here the sources in the archaeology he uses, he doesn't have good sources. He constantly talks about how bad his sources are, but he makes them do work for him. He makes his sources tell them things they don't want to tell him. So when it comes to oral traditions, he said oral traditions are bad, but certain oral traditions are the more probable. Homer, he said Homer is an exaggerator. He's not to be trusted, but the catalog of ships, he thinks, probably has some good information in it. And he analyzes that very closely. Prose writers, perhaps, but what he's especially concerned with is deductions from Tecmeria. And it's been pointed out that there's all this deductive terminology in the archaeology. He doesn't say always, I think. That's what he ends with, I think. First of all, he talks about the deductions that can be made from the Tecmeria that he has. So it seems, it's probable, there's a model, there's evidence, it's clear, something is attested, it's a conjecture, and then it's obviously or perhaps true, things like that. So you see how many times these terms are used. These are not key words so much, but I just wanted to stress how frequent they are. And also the methods. A lot of anthropologists really admire Thucydides and think he's way ahead of his time because he looks at geography, he looks at material culture, he makes cultural comparisons, he reads myths as symbols. And also, he looks at early literature and poetry in a resistant way. In other words, he makes it tell us things that it doesn't really want to tell us, but he analyzes it closely for the implicit information it gives us. And all of those are admirable things, but they also, many people would argue who are against the archaeology that he carries them out badly. For example, in a passage that looks very good to us, he says, I thought these people were probably Carians because when the island of Delos was dug up for the graves during a purification of the sanctuary of Delos, the burials were all of one kind, and the grave goods and the weapons were Carian, and the burials were the same kind that the Carians used. Boy, that sounds like an archaeologist, right? But also today, I hear from archaeologists, that sounds like a bad archaeologist. A bad archaeologist who says physical remains give you ethnic identity. That's something the archaeologists say you cannot do. Or else they say, well, he probably didn't really even go look at the site. And of course, he didn't know what Carians looked like. And he probably is full of misunderstandings. And that's true, but that doesn't mean his method is not admirable, at least to him. He's not really encumbered by many facts here. He's not interested in facts and actual evidence. He's much more interested in deductions. So that makes this a very interesting period. He's not the only person to do this, by the way, but he's almost the only person. The only person of his time, apart from Thucydides, who does this is a Hippocratic writer in a work called On Ancient Medicine that Mark Schiefsky actually edited. And he pointed out the similarity to the archaeology. On Ancient Medicine tries to deduce from plausible reconstructions of the past how medicine and also how cooking got its start, how human beings developed them both. And it does a lot of this deduction. And it's actually less good even than Thucydides on it. It's kind of silly in places, but it does do the same thing. And of course, Thucydides is kind of silly in places too. So that's taking you kind of into this section. And what you're going to be reading about then is these 7 sections here.